Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast with Jim Squire. I'm a licensed psychotherapist here in Toronto, Canada. And in this episode, we're going to talk about why high-functioning professionals often struggle quietly. I want to talk about the experience of those people that seem highly functional, generally successful by most measures, still feel like something is quietly off. They're not depressed necessarily, not falling apart certainly, just not quite right. If that resonates with you at all, even a little, I'd like you to ask you to stay with me for the next little while, because I think this episode might offer you something useful. If your first instinct was, that's not really me, I'd actually ask you to stay too, because in my experience, that instinct, it's often worth examining. So I broke it up into a few sections. So the first, I want to talk a bit about the gap nobody talks about. This is the version of the struggle that gets a lot of attention. It looks like falling apart. It looks like not being able to get out of bed, losing your job, relationships ending visibly, dramatically. The version of struggle is real and it matters, but there's another version that almost never makes it into the conversation. It's the one that a lot of people I work with are living with. It looks like this. You're productive, you're capable, people rely on you and you come through. From the outside, and honestly a lot of the time from the inside too, life looks good. You have things to be grateful for, and you know it. Yet, there's this low-grade sense that something is missing. Not a dramatic emptiness, just a kind of flatness that sits underneath everything. You move from one thing to the next goal, next trip, next project, next weekend. There's a moment of relief or excitement, and then it fades. Then you're back to the same feeling. You might have noticed that you're more comfortable being busy than being still. That the quiet is a little uncomfortable. That when things slow down, something you can't quite name starts to surface. So you fill that space before it gets too loud. You might have noticed that you're quicker to irritability than you'd like to be. The people who love you sometimes feel the edges of something in you you don't fully understand yourself. Or maybe you've kind of noticed a glass wall. You're in the room, you're engaged, you're doing all the things, but there's a slight distance between you and the experience. Perhaps like you're watching your own life more than living it. None of this typically is dramatic, none of it stops you from functioning, but it's there and it doesn't go away. That gap between how things look and how things feel is what I want to talk about today. Now for the next few minutes, I want to discuss something we call the hedonic treadmill. I want to start with something that I think a lot of high-functioning people recognize immediately when they hear it described, even if they never had a name for it. It's a concept in psychology called the hedonic treadmill. The basic idea is that we pursue things, achievements, experiences, relationships, and possessions with the expectation that getting them will make us feel better. And they do for a while. But then we adapt. The new baseline becomes just baseline. And we're back to where we started, emotionally reaching for the next thing. For most people, this is a background hum. For high-functioning, driven people, it can become almost the organizing principle of a life. You set the goal, you work hard, you achieve it. There's a moment, sometimes a good one, of satisfaction, and then it fades faster than it should. And instead of stopping to ask why, the instinct is to set the next goal, get the next thing, plan the next trip, find the next project that will make it feel like enough. I want to be careful here because I'm not saying ambition is a problem. Drive is not a pathology. Working hard towards something that matters is generally meaningful. But there's a difference between pursuing things because they're generally fulfilling and pursuing things because the movement itself keeps a certain feeling at bay. When I talk with clients that are caught in this pattern, what often emerges is that the doing isn't really about the goal. It's about not stopping. Because stopping means feeling something they've been successfully outrunning for a very long time. And here's the thing that I find really important to name. This pattern usually didn't start in adulthood. It usually has roots. The high achiever who can't rest, who measures their worth and output, who feels vaguely anxious when things are calm, that person usually learns something early about what it meant to be enough, about what happened when they fell short, about whether the world was safe when they weren't performing. I'll come back to that, but I want to sit with this for a moment because I think it's worth naming clearly. If you've been achieving, waiting for it to feel like enough, and it hasn't, that's not a motivation problem. It's not ingratitude. It's not a character flaw. It's a signal. And signals are worth paying attention to. In this section, I want to talk a bit about functioning well is not the same as being okay. This may be the most important thing I want to say in this episode, so I want to take some time with it. High functioning is not the same as regulated. And I'm not trying to alarm anyone. I say it because I think it's generally liberating to understand. When we talk about being regulated in a therapeutic context, we're talking about the nervous system. We're talking about whether your internal state, your baseline level of activation, your capacity to feel safe, your ability to be present without a low hum of anxiety running in the background is actually settled, or whether it just looks settled from the outside. A lot of very high-functioning people have nervous systems that are working incredibly hard. The hypervigilance, the constant low-level scanning for what might go wrong can look like conscientiousness. The emotional containment can look like composure. The constant forward motion can look like ambition. And all these things can be true at the same time as the nervous system being quietly dysregulated underneath. So what does dysregulation look like in highly functioning or high-functioning people? It often looks like this. Difficulty fully relaxing, even on vacation, even on weekends, even when there's nothing to do and nothing is wrong. Sleep that doesn't quite restore. You might fall asleep fine, but there's a quality of tiredness that just lives in your body. That rest doesn't seem to change. A short fuse under pressure that feels disproportionate to what's actually happening. Moments of reactivity that surprise even you. Emotional shutdown, particularly in close relationships. The ability to be warm and engaging professionally and then to feel strangely distant or flat at home. It's like the intimacy that should feel good is somehow harder to access than it should be. And a kind of background hum. Not anxiety exactly, not sadness exactly, just a persistent sense that something is slightly off that you can't quite locate. None of this typically stops high-functioning people from functioning. That's the point. These patterns are compatible with successful career, a full life, a good reputation, which is exactly why they go unaddressed for so long. I want to say something directly here. If you ever thought, I don't have a good enough reason to be struggling, I want you to hear that thought is one of the most common things I encounter in this work. And it's almost never accurate. The nervous system doesn't measure suffering against an objective standard before deciding whether to respond. It responds to what it learned, and what it learned a long time ago. In this section, I want to talk a bit about how earlier life experiences shape the adult. This is where I want to talk a bit about a loaded word for some people, so I'm going to ask you to hold it lightly while I describe it rather than reacting to the word itself. which you probably guessed is trauma. When most people hear that word, they think of something specific and dramatic, a single catastrophic event, something obvious, visible consequences, and the kind of trauma is real and it matters, obviously. But that's not the only kind of experience that shapes the nervous system. The broader category, sometimes called developmental trauma or complex trauma, that refers to the cumulative effect of experiences over time. Not necessarily one big thing, but a pattern. Growing up in an environment where emotional attunement was inconsistent, where love felt conditional on performance, where conflict was unpredictable or frightening, where you learned early that the safest thing was to manage yourself very well, to be capable, to be helpful, take up the right amount of space, but not too much. Many high-functioning adults I work with don't identify as trauma survivors, but their own definition, and by their own definition, they may be right. Nothing happens to them that we would call traumatic in the traditional sense. But when we start to map the patterns, the hypervigilance, the perfectionism, difficulty resting, the emotional distance in relationships, the relentless forward motion, in the sense of never quite being good enough, the picture that emerges is very consistent. These are adaptive responses. They make sense at the time. They were often the smartest possible things a young person could do with a difficult environment. The problem is that they don't update automatically. The nervous system keeps running the old programs even when the circumstances have completely changed. So, for example, the adult who learned that worth comes from achievement keeps achieving, even when there's nothing left to prove. The adult who learned that vulnerability led to disappointment often keeps a careful distance in relationships, even with people who are genuinely safe. The adult who learned that being still meant feeling something painful stays in motion, because the body still remembers that stillness was dangerous, even if the mind was no conscious memory of why. This is not a character flaw, it is not weakness. It is the nervous system doing exactly what nervous systems do, protecting you based on what it learned. And here's what I want you to take from this. These patterns are not fixed. They're not who you are. They're what you learned. And what was learned can be worked with. That doesn't mean it's quick or easy, but it does mean there's something somewhere to go. There's something to resolve rather than just manage. The shift I see in people who do this work, they feel more like themselves, more present, more able to actually receive the good things in life rather than just moving through them. They're able to rest without guilt or discomfort. And they're able to be close to people without the glass wall. That shift is possible and often starts with someone simply deciding that the quiet signal that they've been ignoring for years is worth paying attention to. Now I want to come back to where I started. If you're someone who's functioning well by every extreme measure and still carrying a quiet sense that something isn't right, I want you to know the experience is real, it's more common than you think, and it's workable. You don't need to be falling apart to benefit from this kind of support. You don't need to have a dramatic story or a clear diagnosis, or even a word for what you're experiencing. You just need to be willing to take the signal seriously. Now I want to close by coming back to where we started. If you're someone that is functioning well by every extreme measure, still carrying a quiet sense that something isn't right, I want you to know that experience is real. It's more common than you think, and it's something that can be worked on. You don't need to be falling apart to benefit from this kind of support. You don't need to have a dramatic story or a clear diagnosis, or even a word for what you're experiencing. You just need to be willing to take the signal seriously. If anything in this episode resonated, and you want to explore what that might look like, I do have a free reflection tool on my traumatherapist.ca website. That's www.traumatherapist.ca. It's just a little questionnaire you can do that has some paragraphs that kind of, at the end, kind of give you a sense of how to how to reflect and how to understand what your answers might mean. It's not a diagnosis. It's not a clinical tool. It's just something that may help you make sense of some of the things you've been feeling. Thank you for spending this time with me. It's always a pleasure to do these episodes. And if you ever have time and you have a topic you'd like me to cover, please let me know through my either YouTube or various social media outlets, or you'll see this posted. Send me a message and let me know what you'd like me to cover in future episodes.